we just start. So then, we start with the opening remarks of Dr. Daniela Gurevich, the chair of the Dangur Center at Bar-Ilan University. Thank you, Daniela, for participating in this event, and thank you for the support and contribution of the Dangur Center. So,
thank you for inviting me. So good morning or good evening, wherever you are standing at the moment on the globe. In the name of the Senaim Dangur Center team, I welcome you all near and far to the first RCEP Webinar seminar, marking this significant milestone for future trade, investment and commerce agreement between ASEAN countries. My name is Daniel Gurevich and I am an ethnologist specializing in comparative literature and cultural studies. And I'm the initiator and for over 13 years, the director of the Senaim Dangur Center for Universal Monotheism here at Bar-Ilan University. The Dangur Center was founded in 2008. And over our many years of activity, we did and are still doing our utmost to lay solid foundation for bridging differences and overcoming diversities by means of exchange of ideas based on common universal aspects among nations, religions, and values. Or in other words, we connect people through cultural diplomacy. As cultural agents, it is our duty to encourage and develop common language between people. And what can be a better opportunity to connect people than through commerce? Through the ages, from the Greeks to Romans, Marco Polo, the Silk Road, the Byzantine Empire, the market, the merchants were always a valuable source for exchange of ideas, sometimes unintentionally. Traders enabled exchange of not only goods, but of art and music and folklore as well. Nowadays, on the third millennium, as the world has become smaller or nearer, nothing is too far to reach the global village. And every traveler and common tourist can become a storyteller or a cultural agent. And still, by the law of the big numbers, such an agreement, including a population of over 1 billion people, is by all means significant. This is exactly the projects we embrace and encourage in our center. We feel privileged, and it is our great pleasure to support this important gathering. I believe the RCEP will bear fruits that will nourish not only good business, but much greater, new cultural ties and genuine collaboration that we cannot even imagine at the moment in the future to come. I congratulate all the organizers involved, headed by Adas Peled. Thank you, Alon Levkovich, Michal Zeltzer-Lavid, and I wish you all a fruitful and a meaningful seminar or webinar.
Logged in. So we'll start with the speakers who are already connected to the webinar. So we start officially with a short introduction of the RCEP, and this is mainly my role. So what is on the agenda? We'll have a short introduction, then we'll have the different speakers. We imagine we'll have an alphabetical order by the countries, but I think we'll change the order of speakers and have first those who are already online. And then we go for a Q&A session about the RCEP. So I'll only take very few minutes of the audience to give just a very brief and general introduction for the RCEP. I think we have all followed the news, some of us more closely. The RCEP was recently signed in a virtual signing ceremony, hosting 15 countries and nearly 30% of the global trade. And this is a significant achievement for Asia. The RCEP is quite comprehensive, and the 15 members include a diverse mix of high-income economies, such as Australia and Japan and Korea, who are present in this presentation, upper middle income economies, such as Indonesia and Thailand, and also lower middle income. And the purpose of this seminar is actually to understand how this the RCEP will impact Asia, and what are the global foreseen scenarios following the entry into force of the RCEP. It is estimated that the ratification process will take about 1 year. The RCEP is a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which means that the scope of the agreement actually exceeds a very narrow definition of only tariff and customs reductions, but it discusses to a great detail actually many issues related to trade and investment. There are 20 chapters. We're definitely not going to go through all the chapters today, but so we have the initial provisions and the definitions, a chapter about trade in goods, trade rules of origin, which is really significant because this will this chapter potentially may change how supply and demand works in Asia and the competitiveness of Asia in the global economy. We have custom procedures and trade facilitation rules, which are also quite important because it unifies and harmonizes the different systems. We have a chapter about standards and technical regulations, trade remedies, trading services, also quite significant in terms of scope. Temporary movement of natural persons, investment into intellectual property, electronic commerce, competition, a chapter about small and medium enterprises, economic and technical cooperation, government procurement. It seems quite a robust agreement. Still, some things are missing in the RCEP. We don't see in the RCEP some concrete undertakings regarding labor protection or some other which are criticized by some NGOs worldwide. What is very important for the RCEP when we take a brief look, it consolidates and builds upon existing trade agreements, which means that it will harmonize the different provisions between the different free trade agreements already existing, and this is quite important. Generally speaking, in order really to fully understand the scope and impact of the RCEP, and particularly to companies and corporations, you need to take a more detailed look at the annexes. And what's very interesting when you start observing those, hundreds and thousands of pages, is that most of the tariff reduction is very gradual, and it will take, some of the tariff reduction will enter into force in 5-year times or 20 years times, and there are also different relationships between the different member countries. So this means that there will be different effects to the RCEP, to the different members. This is the first event of the RCEP. We intend to host members from all member countries, and also significant missing member countries, such in India, which was a party to the negotiation but then left, or some other observers from the European Union and from the US. So please stay tuned for this series of webinar. And I will not take much more time, and we will start with the first honorable speaker, Mr. David Uren. He's one of Australia's leading economic writer. He has a very rich, flourishing career, and he wrote many influential books, including The Kingdom and The Quarry. His writings are widely known worldwide, and in particular in China, where I first heard his name, highly discussing, his scholarship and his views. I don't know, maybe is June with us already? I don't know, maybe. No, she still cannot log in. Maybe that is one of the problems. So without further ado, we give the floor to Mr. Warren. And do you have a presentation or just speaking?
No, I'll just talk. No PowerPoints.
Oh. Okay. So please, your 10 minutes of glory.
Okay.
Download the.
So the comedian Groucho Marx once said that he'd never join any club that would accept him as a member. Well, Australia is the opposite. It's eager to join just about any club that will have it. And that obviously includes the RCEP. As the most geographically remote top 20 country economy, Australia has an instinctive urge to break its isolation. It was very early signing on to the League of Nations in the 30s, the United Nations in the 40s, the General Agreement of Tariff and Trade in the 50s. Australia's sense that its interests as a middle trading power are furthered by international agreements mean that it has often helped to forge them. So Australia was an important catalyst behind the Uruguay round that led to the creation of the WTO. It was one of the prime movers behind the formation of APEC in the 1980s and its elevation as a leaders forum in the 1990s. It similarly helped to establish the G20 as a finance ministers forum in the wake of the Asian financial crisis, and then lobbied hard following the global economic crisis to have it made a leaders forum to coordinate the international response. Australia also worked with Singapore to broaden the East Asia Summit membership to include the leaders of the US, China, Russia, and India. So Australia has, since the election of a Conservative government in 2013, enthusiastically embraced bilateral trade deals with China, Japan, South Korea, as well as a regional deal including ASEAN and New Zealand. So Australia was always going to be enthusiastic about the RCEP. But why now? Well, the RCEP talks had dragged on for years with it difficult to find common agreement between its disparate members. So there was impetus for its conclusion reflected in the concern about the unilateralism of the United States under Donald Trump with its withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership and its trade war with China. I think that this made China more willing to compromise on matters that were important to Australia and Japan, amongst others, issues like services, investment, intellectual property. China, as I understand it, had originally wanted the RCEP really to focus on goods trade. It's probable that the Indian decision to pull out made the conclusion of the deal easier, although India was ready to agree with the text until the very last minute. Well, I think the biggest achievement of the RCEP is its simple rules of origin across the region. Provided 40% of the value of a good is made in the RCEP region, it's entitled to the RCEP reduced tariffs. And while the RCEP is often criticised as a shallow trade agreement, the simple rules of origin are a major achievement and vastly simpler than the complex exceptions under the CPTPP or the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. However, simple rules of origin were of relatively little value to Australia because Australia does not have a manufacturing sector that's really integrated into regional value chains across Asia. No one sends components to Australia for further processing before sale elsewhere. Australia's too far away, it's too small in scale, and it's too high cost. Australia's principal role in the regional goods trade is as a supplier of primary goods, resources, agricultural products. A data point that I came across the other day is that Australia's exports to China fetch an average of $100 million for every million tonnes, while its imports from China cost about $3 billion for every million tonnes landed. And I think that kind of contrast would be seen with many other countries within the Asian region. I don't set great store by the modelling of trade agreements, but with that said, the Peterson Institute modelling estimated that RCEP would add a maximum of about $3 billion to Australia's exports, so not very much. But the inclusion of services, IP and electronic commerce chapters are important to Australia. The RCEP did not have to match the depth and detail of agreements like the US-Mexico-Canada agreement or the CPTPP, but it had to go beyond simple goods trade. And Australia, along with Japan, advocated strongly for this, and breakthrough in those chapters only really came in 2019. So the services chapter allows countries to maintain a list of sectors where foreign investment is limited, but all other sectors are to be open. Discrimination between national and RCEP member firms is prohibited. The investment chapter also includes a most favoured nation provision so that any favourable treatment offered to any country must be extended to all RCEP members. It does not include an investor-state dispute settlement mechanism, which Australia would have preferred, but I think New Zealand opposed. The intellectual property chapter is not nearly as comprehensive as the CPTPP provisions, but it does go beyond it in protecting non-traditional trademarks such as sound marks and a wide range of industrial designs and forms of digital copyright. So there were some significant achievements, I think, for Australia's interests. Beyond the advancement of self-interest, which every nation that enters a trade negotiation has at its heart, I think Australia saw some broader geopolitical significance in RCEP as an important addition to the regional economic infrastructure. It would have much preferred India to have remained in the agreement as a counterbalance to China. And although China is by far the largest economy in the RCEP, Australia never lost sight of the fact that it is an ASEAN-driven agreement. Australia is happy to engage with ASEAN as an equal partner with China in terms of the mechanisms within this agreement. I don't have this directly, but I'm sure Australia saw geopolitical value in an agreement that brings together Japan, South Korea and China in the one regional trade group, given the history of tensions between each of these three. I asked about the hurdles, and as I'm sure everybody probably knows, Australia is currently locked in an increasingly bad-tempered relationship with China, which is by far its biggest trading partner. In response to restrictions that Australia has placed on Chinese investment, also including its participation of Chinese companies in the 5G rollout, China is taking discriminatory action against Australian trade. And I guess, to me, it raises the question of what is the value of international trade rules, including those of the RCEP framework, if they can be ignored without the least accountability. So to date, China has imposed anti-dumping duties on Australian barley and wine, while phytosanitary restrictions have halted sales of beef, timber, and then there's arbitrary refusal to provide customs clearance of stopped sales of Australian cotton, lobster, coal. I think it's up to about $13 or $14 billion a year worth of agricultural goods, and with coal now, another $20-30 billion is held up. High value services exports of education and tourism have obviously been stopped by the COVID pandemic, but Chinese authorities have made it clear that both will be targeted once international travel resumes. Now, there is from China, different countries, different powers manage their power in different ways. The US uses economic sanctions very widely to punish countries. China has often used discriminatory trade barriers to punish countries for various offences. Norwegian salmon exports to China were halted for 7 years after the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the dissident Liu Xiaobo. Philippine banana and mango sales were left to rot on the wharves after it won an international arbitration declaring China's claims to the South China Sea were without foundation. South Korea saw China's tourism dry up, Hyundai car sales in China vanish, and its supermarket chain Lot forced to pull out of China after it allowed the US to install a missile defense system. However, there has never before been such a broad trade attack as the one that is being mounted at the moment on Australia. So Australia is appealing the barley dumping duties to the WTO, even though its dispute settlement system is not functioning. Australia is powerless to, but other than that, Australia is really powerless to respond to the discriminatory treatment of other exports. And I guess, this is, you might see this as a bit of a foray outside the parameters of the RCEP, but it really, I think, to my mind, does raise the question of, well, what is the value of these agreements if they're not capable, if you can't use the forum that they create to deal with trade disputes. Australia has complained that the Chinese actions breach the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. China responds that Australia's blocking of Chinese investment on national security grounds also breaches the agreement. The complaints on both sides are being run through the media, with Australian trade officials unable to discuss the issue with Chinese counterparts. So there's a view in Australia that China is seeking to make an example of it in order to keep other nations, particularly those in the region, in line. And while that view may unduly exculpate Australia from responsibility in the dispute, and I frankly think Australia does have some responsibility in the dispute, it still, I think, has some validity. It raises a question of how China will exercise its growing economic power as it continues to grow stronger. And to what extent will it seek to involve a quasi-tributary status on smaller trading nations in Asia, as it has to some extent already with Cambodia, Laos and Nepal. And certainly I think the limited dispute settlement mechanism within RCEP is unlikely to prove a valid constraint. So I think that, yes, it's good to be excited about the breakthrough of this regional agreement. It does some important things, but I think that the thought that a trade agreement can in some way help to manage tensions between countries, I think the current experience of Australia and China raises some fairly fundamental questions about that.
Thank you, David. This was very much timely and very much updated with the latest updates on the WTO dispute related definitely to the RCEP. We have a short poll to share with you all following the discussion of each speaker. So Alon, please, can you please start the poll? So you only need to respond with regard to Australia. We'll go further for each country. We're highly interested in your views, in particular after we heard such an introduction by David Uren. Okay. So by the time we gather the responses, we're gonna move forward for the next speaker. And Professor Afikumi Kuchiki, because China has some connection problem, you are the next. So let me briefly introduce
Okay.
Okay. So before Professor Kuchiki start, I will just briefly introduce. We are truly honored to have you as a speaker today in this event. Professor Kuchiki has more than 4 decades of a very thriving career, going through all World Bank and regional banks, and going the administration in Japan. He has taught in the leading institutions in Japan over the past 4 decades, and published a lot of influential books about industrial clusters and innovation. And really, this is the information here is only a very limited summary of his recent writing. So without wasting too much time, we give the floor to Professor Kuchiki. Thank you for this.
Yeah, and Dr. Hada, can I share my PowerPoint?
Alon?
Oh, sorry.
Share it. Oh, sorry. You can share your PowerPoint. You can upload it. Do you want?
Yeah, Can I share?
Yeah, we see your share screen. We see a Zoom screen.
We see the Zoom.
You can see?
No, we can see. We can see your Zoom screen. You have to share the PPT.
No?
That's the
I don't know.
That's the his PPT.
I have, yes, I still have the PPT. So
Okay, can you share?
Let me try.
Yeah, please try.
Okay.
Okay. I hope I can do.
Okay, we can.
You can see?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. And so today I talk about the next step of, I don't know, in Japan, we always say RCEP, RCEP. Is it acceptable? RCEP. And from the standpoint of Japan. And today's topic and the conclusion in 10 minutes. A big impact of RCEP on the Japanese economy. But as Dr. Hada said, the level of RCEP is very low. And today, I also talk about the future of China. China will exceed the US in terms of GDP in 2028. And so, next stage of the world, it's now turning point against anti-globalization, I hope. And so, big impact means it's the first FTA between China, South Korea, ASEAN, and Japan. Particularly China and South Korea. It's a very big impact to the Japanese economy, even though the level of RCEP is low. And the economic effects of RCEP on Japan's trade trade is 46%. And world economy, the world GDP is about 30%. World trade also 30%. And as I said, and the level of RCEP is not so high, means its rate of tariff abolition is 91%. But the level, the rate of CPTPP, and in other name, TPP 11 is 99%. And export from Japan to China is 86%, and to South Korea 81%. So the level is not so high. And import to Japan from China is 86%. From South Korea, 83%. And ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand, 88%. Regarding the manufacturing good, export to other countries are 93%. To China, it's very high, it's 98%. To Korea also, South Korea also too high, 93%. And import to Japan is in total 92%. And from China, 86%, and South Korea, 92%. But still there are tariff exemptions, 5 important items, including rice, wheat, beef, milk product, and sweet resource crops. And as Dr. Harris said, it takes a very long time. It's battery materials for electric vehicles. It takes 16 years. Maybe this means meaningless. And the level is low, means that electric commerce is included, but the rule is very loose, and other things. So regarding services, the type of list of service trade are both positive list and negative list. And positive list must be scheduled to convert to the negative list. And from this part, it's very my personal opinion. And regarding the future of China, this year was a record-making year. Means it's the fortune of global 500 top 10 firms are 3 are Chinese: Sinopec, State Grid, China National Petroleum. And this table is very important. Number of companies, US 121, but China overcome the number at 124. This is the first time to be reversed. And GDP share of US is 27.2%, and China 17.8% in 2018. But Nikkei Research Institute Incorporation forecasted that China will exceed the US in terms of GDP in 2028. And So next step, struggle for supremacy between US and China. That's important. And I think it's a turning point of the movement of anti-globalization, including America First and Brexit. And after RCEP, CPTPP, it's a TPP 11 is the next. CPTPP, United States get out by President Trump, but TPP 11, the next stage is include US and China, I hope. And there are 3 agreements. Japan-US trade agreement, 2020, January 1st. Japan-EU 2019, February 1st. Japan-UK EPA next year, effective. And so, my personal opinion, I hope already China showed interest in the entry of TPP, and it is possible for US to come back to TPP because rule is open to US. And the UK will join CPTPP, and President Biden is ready to come back to TPP. It's a question mark. But China showed the interest in CPTPP. So I hope, linkage between Japan, China, EU, and the US, then the coverage become more than 80% of all over the world. And next topic is my very personal interest. I think it's agglomeration is a keyword. And the next stage, the introduction of FDI is a key to China's growth strategy. And the development of digital industry agglomeration and green industry agglomeration. It's a competition in the agglomeration. Then, so keyword is global value chain by regional integration. It's a mega integration. And the agglomeration is a key to the success in growth strategy. And next one is a commercial. Please submit your paper to economies of MDPI. The deadline is next month. I hope you submit. Thank you very much for your attention. That's all. Thank you, others.
Thank you, Professor Kuchiki. I wish we had more time to hear more about your theory and your research. Perhaps this can be done and achieved in a different opportunity. And I think it gives us a lot of information about the RCEP and the impact to Japan. So please continue with the poll. We have a question for each of the countries. So we kindly ask all attendees and panelists to respond to our poll. And the next and our next speaker, Alon, I need to be.
You can share, yeah. Now you can share.
So the next speaker, actually, here I'm really happy we have this opportunity because for us, not every day we have a guest from Indonesia. So I'm really honored to introduce Mr. Rafli Zulfikar. He's a policy advisor at the Center for International Studies and Trade in Java, Indonesia. He's actually a well-known columnist in Indonesia. He serves as an expert staff advisor for a member of the parliament, and he holds a Bachelor of Sciences majoring in international relations from the University of Jember, and won several academic prizes and awards. So Rafli, thank you so much for kindly taking on our invitation, and I hope it will further the cooperation between Indonesia and Israel. So Rafli, do you want to share a presentation?
Yes, Hadas. Thank you for inviting me. You can hear me, Hadas?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay.
And you can share a screen if you want. Oh.
Sorry.
Yes, you have to unshare your screen.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Rafli. First, in the webinar, I want to talk about RCEP from two perspectives. First, from economic perspective, and then international political perspective. The first, RCEP initiative was first introduced by Indonesia in 2012 when Indonesia was the chair of ASEAN. The initiative came as a response to pressing come from some free trade agreement partner of ASEAN, like ASEAN +3, ASEAN and Australia and New Zealand. This is FTA members, and then linkage between two states, each states, sorry. And then what opportunity for Indonesia to join the RCEP? I think first opportunity for Indonesia is market access opening, because Indonesia today want to build more attractive country in ASEAN. And then since the beginning of the initiative, ASEAN realized ASEAN realized that the economic gain benefit from the opening market access under the RCEP will not be too significant, as most of the benefit already comes from the existing FTA agreement, like ASEAN +3, ASEAN and Australia and New Zealand. Second, enjoying foreign direct investment, or PMI. This agreement is expected to boost FDI growth in the new industry sector that can utilize the RCEP potential as a global region with 22 billion population. New investment is key to establish of the new industry. Therefore, the RCEP member that will be able to seize the opportunities is the country with attractive investment regime and good infrastructure support. Today, Indonesia make a omnibus bill can actually 3 point from the omnibus bill. First, the deregulation. Second, the bureaucratization. And third is liberalization. This is the opportunity for Indonesia to join the RCEP. And then what the challenges for Indonesia to join the RCEP. Before that, this is a easy doing for business ranking in ASEAN. Indonesia still lack of easy of doing business in ASEAN. The problem is first corruption, and then second the ineffective bureaucracy, and then lack of infrastructure. What are the challenges for ASEAN, for Indonesia to join RCEP? Sorry. Challenges for ASEAN, challenges for Indonesia to join RCEP. Indonesia should be reform economic, structural, and policy adjustment. Indonesia must be prepare or implement policy or structural adjustment to maximize the gain from RCEP in very near future. The government realized that the key success to take advantage of RCEP for Indonesian economic development is to improve national competitiveness of the existing industry and the investment climate to attract investment in digital industry and thus oriented toward the fourth industrial revolution. This is challenges in economic. And then next, what international aspect on RCEP Indonesian perspective? I think RCEP is China design. Nowadays, China foreign policy in the Pacific, such as our maritime Silk Road, IEE, ASEAN Infrastructure Investment Banking, and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Program are more dynamic than US pivot to the Asia encourage Asia Pacific country to join the China scheme. Although, until now, China is not a good player in the Southeast Asia. For example, 9 test line in the South China Sea. China is not good player in the South Asian region due to its anarchic for foreign policy, such as the 9 test line in the South China Sea that has caused a destructive relation among the China and Asia Pacific country. The US to decrease its foreign policy in Southeast Asia will make unipolarism in Southeast Asia battleground, as China will get the opportunity to continue its hegemony in this area. Need more balancing in Southeast Asia region. What about Indonesia foreign policy in Southeast Asia battleground? Indonesia, with autonomous foreign policy, can get more benefit in Southeast Asia battleground under President Joko Widodo ambitious development policy. This is because it's require more growth to create more job and decisive policy to join economic integration, such as RCEP, to build various infrastructure to push economic growth. Pragmatic autonomy of Indonesian foreign policy is good one to respond the dynamic geopolitical condition in Southeast Asia. Indonesia has not only followed a Beijing pivot, but also to Tokyo or US pivot. Indonesia must have strong leadership challenges for international aspect. Indonesia must have strong leadership. It is a deterrent effect to another country, especially to China, that Indonesia also has power. Indonesia foreign policy, such as Natuna South China Sea conflict, is one for example. Indonesia can beat China in Natuna. Indonesia also has the potential power to bargain when it can bring ASEAN to unite in responding to external threat. Furthermore, Indonesia has homework to manage foreign policy in the region. If Indonesia manage it, it will have more potential power to bargain with Beijing or Tokyo. As the autonomous foreign policy in Indonesia must be revitalized more to be slightly offensive and pragmatic to survive in the Southeast Asian battleground, especially in the RCEP geopolitical perspective. I think it's my presentation for Hadas. Thank you very much, Hadas.
Thank you, Rafli. This was very interesting. It's for us in Israel, it's maybe a very rare opportunity to hear the views from Indonesia. So we are very much appreciative of accepting this invitation, and I kindly relate. Maybe the presentation was very informative and helpful. I kindly relate to the last slide of Professor Kuchiki with a call for papers. So I think maybe if each of the participants will further consider this, that would be a good idea. Without further ado, we continue straight to Korea. I'll briefly introduce Professor Jin-He Lim. And Jin-He, would you like to share your slides, or would you like me to share your slides?
I'll share my slide.
Okay, so just a brief introduction to Professor Lim. She's an assistant professor and faculty advisor in the Global Affairs program at the George Mason University in South Korea. Her research sits in the intersection of international and comparative political economy, particularly focusing on economic liberalization and development. She has a broad theoretical interest in those fields, in particular in the fields of discussion today, and a wide array of publications. Without further ado, let's welcome Professor Lim.
Yeah, let me share my slide first.
Yeah.
Share. You have to answer.
Yeah, I unshared mine.
Okay. Muslim.
Yep. Give me a second to share my slide.
You got 35 seconds if you want.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Can you show my slide?
Yes.
For some reason.
Yes. In a minute.
Thank you.
So please tell me. I'll be your slide aid. Okay.
Yep. Sure. Yeah. Thank you for introducing me and having me today. So I am asked to talk about the RCEP. I'm gonna just say RCEP. And then from the South Korea's point of view. So next slide, please. As I get requested, I'm going to talk about the timing, significance, and the hurdles and future directions. Next slide, please. So first off, why now? So as you all might know, RCEP negotiations have been dragging on for 8 years. Then why should South Korea and other 14 countries sign in the RCEP now? The first reason can be found in the global economy. We are now facing two global trends against liberalism caused by trade protectionism and the pandemic. The global turn towards protectionism indeed began after the global financial crisis of 2009. Trump's withdrawal from TPP in 2017 accelerated this move, and South Korea had to find an alternative or its own way to survive. Besides, the COVID crisis brought the challenge in this year. Attention has been directed to domestic recovery efforts, and it has led to a spike in protectionism and economic uncertainty in global economy. In addition, despite increasing importance and economic development of Asia Pacific countries, their global value chain participations remain stagnated in last decades. It only increased by 2% between 2007 and 2017. The regional value chain participants within 15 member countries of RCEP are actually decreasing from 2017. As you might know, global value chains are an essential component of contemporary global economy. They're cross-border industrial network for producing goods, where countries specialize in different stages of production associated with the finished products. Thus, multilateral cooperation is highly required. However, since the early 2000s, the global economy has gone through a turn to bilateralism. Rather than pursuing multilateral agreements at the global or regional level, governments have preferred smaller bilateral free trade agreements. But from the value chain perspective, bilateral FTAs are a major problem. As they only lower barriers between two economies, they're of little assistance of complex value chains that incorporate many countries. There are major differences in rules, standards, and procedures in each bilateral FTA. These create inconsistencies and distortions that actually raise the friction in global value chains. It was a time for us to find the momentum to increase the region's multilateral effort and global value chain. Lastly, South Korea will find it easier to build their value chain where production is based in ASEAN with Northeast Asian investment. In fact, ASEAN countries have been receiving an increasing amount of manufacturing FDI from Japan, South Korea. Actually, it is already bigger than other countries, including China. Such a sharp increase in investment into ASEAN is not only a response to higher labor costs in China, but also meant to diversify away from an excessively China-centric value chain. Thanks to this, South Korean trade integration within the RCEP has also been increasing, especially when focusing on intermediate goods. Against this backdrop, ASEAN will likely grow its own manufacturing capacity, and South Korea can take advantage of it. Next slide, please. Before talking about significance, let me look at some statistical significance of RCEP. I can agree more with the fact that not only for South Korea, but also maybe in the world, the RCEP is the most significant trade agreement ever negotiated. Measured by population and economic size, it will be the largest regional trade bloc in existence, accounting for around a third of world GDP. Measured in terms of trade bloc in trade volumes, it explains 25% world share of exports and 24% of imports. Even though the numbers are smaller than the EU for now, it has a potential to overtake Europe on these measures and be the second most important trade agreement behind the WTO. Next slide, please. Especially for South Korea, the RCEP accounts for 48% of trade as of 2019. It far outweighs Korea's trade with USMCA, US-Mexico-Canada agreements members, or even CPTPP members. The Korean government expects to expand export markets and diversify the trade structure with RCEP. In fact, when the Nomuhyang government came up with an FTA roadmap in 2003, the Korean government has worked for this goal. The Moon current government, has clearly identified Southeast Asia as a key region in this diversification strategy. RCEP is thus expected to boost Korea's economic links with member countries. The area where the RCEP's conclusions stand to most clearly impact South Korean industry and business is its effective status as the first FTA concluded between South Korea and Japan. Actually, South Korea has FTAs with all member countries except Japan. But Japan ranks first among countries with which South Korea has suffered the chronic trade deficit, and South Korea expects to have better numbers in these statistics. At the same time, it is the first trilateral FTA among South Korea, Japan, and China. The three of them have been negotiating their own trilateral FTA since 2012, but so far there has been no progress, and there is little hope to make a progress. South Korea and China have had an FTA in effect since 2015, but China and Japan have no FTA in place right now. Thus, RCEP is expected to support trade and supply chains integration in Northeast Asia. For South Korea, the old narrative of being sandwiched between low-cost China and high-tech Japan does not apply anymore in this framework. The last thing that I want to talk about is the geopolitical implications. As part of President Moon's initiative of new Southern policy strategy, the RCEP will be the significant step in geopolitical reasons as well. Not only with ASEAN countries, but South Korea will also strengthen the economic links with New Zealand and Austria, and they will also strengthen the diplomatic links with those countries. Next slide, please. But there are some hurdles, and then we have to overcome this for future directions. For better outcomes, South Korea and other RCEP member countries will have to think a few things like this. Especially for South Korea, balance between CPTPP and RCEP would be important. Still, the RCEP is shallow when compared to CPTPP and other FTAs. And CPTPP aims for stricter common standards on labor issues, environmental protections, and dispute resolutions than those proposed in the RCEP. And for South Korea, it is not easy to ignore the US pressure to join the CPTPP after signing the RCEP, and Korea can be sandwiched again in the trade rivalry between the United States and South Korea. The other thing I have to talk is the uncertainty about India's participation. As you can see in this table, by including India as a member, the RCEP could be strengthened. With India, the RCEP can increase its importance and significance in the world economy in terms of population, GDP, and FDI as well. In addition to that, non-tariff barriers and gaps in industrial competitiveness among member countries should also be addressed as a whole. Although these challenges will not be immediately resolved, they should be the long-term goal for member countries. To this end, I personally would recommend to increase FDI within the region and liberalize measures for FDIs for member countries. As I indicated earlier, FDI into the RCEP member countries has already been increasing. It can build a sustainable value chain by increasing each country's industrial competitiveness. In the end, sustainable supply chains with diverse network connecting internal actors within member countries will be a key to regional integration and development. They will also lead to deepening economic ties among the RCEP members. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Lim, for such encompassing explanation regarding the different foreseen impact of the RCEP. Once it's ratified, I guess it will take a while. And we directly continue with a longtime friend with Thailand. Pyro, I hope you're ready to start. Let me briefly introduce Pyro. Pyro, it's always very interesting to hear the practitioner's view. Practitioner's view is always, they get more feedback from the ground level, and they hear what the companies are trying to do, what are the strategies. So Pyro is the founding partner of Chindaji Associates. He's a first-class attorney at law, and he advised on major cross-border mergers and acquisitions in the aviation, insurance, sports, real estate industries over the years. He's a board member of several companies, and his working languages are Thai, English, Chinese, and Spanish, meaning he covers most of the world. He holds an LLM in Chinese law from Tsinghua University. This is where we met first. And without further ado, I think we give Pyro the opportunity to provide us, to share with us his thoughts about the RCEP.
Okay, thank you for your introductions. I weigh this RCEP, and I share with the others participants that we call it RCEP here. It's the same thing that we call it APEC, ASEAN, or JTAPA. So it means I would use the term RCEP. Okay, I look at in 3 dimensions. First, RCEP is developed from ASEAN plus China, and then plus Japan and Korea. We call Asian plus 3. Then we invite Australia, New Zealand, and India to join these trains, and we call it AEC, or ASEAN plus 6. Okay, since we have my friend from Indonesia, so we share the same experience. It starts from ASEAN plus 3 and plus 6. Now, India would not join this RCEP to protect its steel business, because India is the country built by steel. So it means first, they would like to protect their steel business. Second, the current administration of Modi now promotes made in India concept and policy. So I mean, they could not allow this RCEP to happen with them, because it would invite the influx of the Chinese steel into the market. So I mean, this would not happen in the current administrations. However, if Modi stepped down, India could join this RCEP hopefully. Okay. In the second dimensions, I will it. RCEP is a trade forums and framework. First, I look at the free labor movement, the same thing that we try to do for ASEAN. Second, I look at the foreign investment and try to build single markets. And third, I look at the free capital movements. But you have to be aware that Thailand was wounded very heavily since 1997. So I mean, the free capital movement would not be happen. In the third dimensions, you have to understand Thailand's view towards this RCEP agreements. 3.1, in my view, RCEP contain two main parts. First is trade in goods, and second is trade in services. Okay. Now, what is Thailand's economic landscape? Thailand is 70% GDP export country. So I mean, Thailand is export-oriented country. Second, Thailand is 30% tourism country. It means every year we host more than 40 million tourists in Thailand. In Bangkok alone, we host 22 million tourists every year. over London and Paris. So I mean, this is Thailand landscape. We are exported country. We are services country. So I mean, we play along with this RCEP in the metrics of trade in goods and trade in services. RCEP agreement would be submitted to the parliament for the ratification next year, hopefully in February. And if there's nothing wrong, it would be ratified. Okay, Thailand would reduce the tariff and custom duty in favor of Japan for 88.5%, China 85.2%, Australia and New Zealand 91.3%, South Korea 90%, mostly for the steel, automotive parts and automobile and electrics and electronic goods. So I mean, this is the cluster that we do not really manufacture or produce. So I mean, we open. As I said, we are trade in goods company. Sorry, trade in good country. So Thailand expect more than 650 items of tariff reduction from other member countries in RCEP regime for the agricultural produce, foods, consumable goods, automobile and fishery. So I mean, if I stop here, the products that we import and we reduce the custom duty is for the local manufacturing and we export. Because the size of the countries of 70 million populations is not small, but it's not big. Comparing to China and Japan, it's not small and it's not big. But what we focus is, okay, RCEP whatever, we reduce the custom duty, bring in the raw material, produce and re-export. The main export markets still China, Japan, Korea, EU and USA. As I said, Thailand has 30% economic on the service. So the trade of services would not be open. I mean, Thailand signed many treaties with many regions. WTO, FTA, recently we signed the FTA with Japan for JTEPA. We open manufacturing side because we are the country or trade on goods, but trade on services would not be open. So if you look at RCEP agreement, Thailand make the reservations for all services, industry and sector. So for these services includes retails, bankings, tourism, hospitality. You know, because 1/3 of these incomes of the GDP came from services. So I mean, you can expect that the country will open for the trades because we are exported country. So we are fine with the trading, but for services, we still reserve because services are internal incomes and internal businesses. So on the other part, on the services, we make our reservation in this RCEP agreement that we have the Foreign Business Act, whereby the foreigners or foreign majority owns industrial company could not run the business in Thailand on their own, but they have to join the partner or have the Thai company to run it. So it means this is the state strategy. I do not think that RCEP would change Thailand landscape economy very much because, as I said, we signed many treaties with many regimes, many countries. For example, for ASEAN is the 10 countries in Southeast Asia signed a contract with effect since 2015. But you know why ASEAN could not emerge as a single market? Because countries in ASEAN, they share similar commodities and they reserve all their services. So I mean, if you understand the treaty, international treaty, there are two parts, trade in goods and trade in services. For trade in goods, most countries would open it because goods could be import, export, and trade to each other, and then you build up your manufacturing facilities. For services, most countries in ASEAN, they would reserve the services part. So it means like Indonesia or other countries, they would reserve services part. But only Singapore that open all because Singapore is a country of the free trade because they have no facility and they are too small for any services to acquire them. So they open all. Now, ASEAN with effect since 2015 will not work very much due to every country still maintain their reservation on services. If you maintain reservation on services, what happens next would be, first, you need work permit. Second, you need a foreign business license. Like you go to Vietnam, you go to Thailand, you need foreign business license. Sometimes I go to Korea, Japan, I need work permit. So if you do not liberalize the services, you could not achieve the single market. But all of this, RCEP would not change Thailand's position that much. What Thailand expects, we expect to trade off these custom duty reductions with the chance to get into the markets and the chance to more export, because we're exporting countries. In the meantime, we reserve all services. Services will not be open. And I look at the RCEP member countries, they do not open services, even including Japan or Korea or China, they do not open the services. So it means if you would like to be like EU, you have to open two pillars. You could not open only trade in goods, you have to open trade in services. In overall, what would be a benefit? I think we are optimistic that RCEP would get you a chance to access into the state member country markets. As I said, we are exporting country. We have facilities. We have manufacturing facility. So it means we could reduce custom tariff for the imported product in order that we use this as raw materials, manufacturers, and we export as a export products. So I mean this would be balanced. Services would remain unchanged. For statistics, Thailand got the trade deficit with China is the most country that we got trade deficit because we import so much from China. But you know what? We do not care that much because we have trade benefit from services, because every year we host more than 12 million Chinese tourists to Thailand, and then the Chinese products sold to their own tourism. So it means for these two pillars of the trade in goods and trade in services, you can see that we expect the benefit from this deal, RCEP agreements, but we remain limited opening on the services, and we think we could get the balance of the two things between the goods, the trade in goods and services. On this basis, you can see that RCEP would not change the landscape of the whole regions that much because it would heavily on the trade and goods, and all countries do not open for their services. Now I come to the first discussion on the 3 dimensions. I look that the free labor movement would not be easy to be achieved by these RCEP agreements due to every country's reservations on their services part. They will not allow the free labor movements. And if you do not have the free labor movements, for the countries like ASEAN is difficult to get access into the biggest markets like Japan, Korea, or Australia. So I mean, I hope that RCEP would allow and would further discuss to realize the free labor movements. The foreign investment would be open. I accept the foreign investment would be open because now everybody would like to set their facility for the foreign investment and foreign trade. The free capital movement is not yet on table. It would be discussed later. So what I expect from legal perspective is for Thailand and ASEAN country, we have many laws that restrict the foreign trade and foreign services. It might be lifted by this attempt of RCEP because I still support the free market, because when the labors are moving freely, the goods moving freely, services are moving freely. First, the countries would enhance their compatibility for themselves. Second, for the ASEAN people or ASEAN's laborers, they can move to work in other countries. So it means it would benefit themselves because ASEANs are very good educated regions, but very little chance to work in other countries. On the other hand, for the free labor movements, these the executive and the labor from China, Korea, and Japan or Australia can come to ASEAN and work here without the work permit restrictions. So I mean that would benefit. We sign many treaties, we sign many agreements. It's gradually work, but it is not easy and quickly. But still hope that RCEP would contribute something that okay, all laws, all restrictions would be lifted, and the new generation would have better chance for their workings, for their investments in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pyro. This was really a very realistic analysis of the foreseen impact of the RCEP. Last, we go for China. So I'm introducing Wang Jun. And Jun, she is a last year PhD candidate at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And her research focuses on new economy and sustainability. She holds a master from Northwestern University. And she participates in many important research groups regarding the formulation of national and regional development plans, trade, technology, and macroeconomic forecasts. And she was kind enough to speak only to give only a very short presentation. So June, I'll help you with the slides if this is okay. So I'm your slide aid, and you can wait. Okay. So June, please start.
Different countries. So could you all hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
My voice clear? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's really sorry. There's some technical issue that made me late to join the meeting, but it's really a great pleasure to see different scholars from different RCEP countries to share their opinions. I heard a lot of the China, even though I didn't appear in the previous lectures, but I do hear what you're talking about. And a lot of the professors mentioned about China, and actually, even though there may be still some dispute among China with other countries, but since we can sit together and sign this agreement, and also for other scholars, we can sit together to discuss this agreement. I think there must be some positive effect of the RCEP agreement. So I would like to talk a little bit of my own perspective about the RCEP meaning to China and to the world. Just my own personal opinion doesn't represent the CAS opinion. Okay, firstly, maybe I want to start from the meaning to the word. How does you change the next slide? Meaning to the word. Maybe the first one. The first. Yeah, it's meaning to the word. Yeah, we can tell from this graph that Professor Lim has already shown that there are the major free trade areas in the world right now, and you can tell the RCEP takes a very great large amount in terms of the GDP, population, and trade value. But when we look at the time and force of this agreement, firstly is the European FTA and NAFTA, and right now is the US, Mexico, Canada agreement. And actually, I forgot to put the
June, can you hear us?
So yeah, I just come back. Could you hear me? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So maybe 1 or 2 minutes because the line is not very good.
Since we reached the RCEP, and we can tell, and the the situation is that the internal trade among Asia Pacific countries is quite low right now. For the Europe, they're having 70% of the trade are done internally within the European Union, and for the NAFTA, they're having 40% conducted within their areas. But for our side, we only have 30%. So there's really a great potential for us to keep moving in this direction. And secondly, I think the reason why is I want to talk about it, and from the direct
The line for China is too weak. Maybe we would have the presentation in the China's
in the next meeting.
In the next
meeting.
session.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think we continue straight to a very short comment by our discussants, and we start with Dr. Marsha Harpaz. She's a lecturer in the International Relations Department and the Faculty of Law at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And she's a trade expert with quite a lot of publications about trade. She's a panelist on the dispute. She's on the roster of panelists for the dispute settlement and the free trade agreement between Israel and Mexico. And she had an immense contribution to the to Israeli trade. Marsha, maybe a few comments or some questions to finish this session.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank Hadass and Alon for organizing this very timely event. And I really enjoyed all of the thought-provoking presentations. And I will try just to highlight some of the things I had planned on saying. One of the things I thought I wanted to talk about was the biggest question about RCEP, and that's who are the winners? Who's the big winner? And what I had wanted to talk about and look at this from three perspectives: geopolitical, economic, and legal, and argue that it isn't China, as many commentators say, that it's actually all of the the RCEP grouping, regional grouping that will gain. So I'll just skip over a few things. I was a bit surprised when I heard from Indonesia and from Thailand, I think it was, that they don't expect to gain that much, because as David pointed out, this rules of origin is I guess huge, something huge that's in this RCEP. So even though many of these countries, the ASEAN countries, have free trade agreements with other members of the new members of RCEP, what it means is that they will have the same rules of origin for the whole grouping. So it means that Indonesian companies and Thai companies can join in the regional value chain, which is something I think that's pretty new. There won't be anything stopping it. It's one rule, one set of rules of origin, which are actually three sets of rules of origin, very flexible rules of origin. If one doesn't work, then the other rule might work. So it means that that those companies will be able to join to export more. Everybody was talking about exporting more. So, and become part of this regional value chain. So I think that that's one of the big things. That's a big gain. That I consider that one of the huge economic gains. From a geopolitical perspective, everybody pretty much mentioned what the geopolitical perspective was, that now there's an agreement between Japan and China, an agreement between Japan and South Korea, something completely new. I won't talk about that anymore. Then somebody, I think, mentioned that there still are problems with China, and that was one of the reasons why everybody's commenting on the problems with China in the South China Sea. And so I think that that's why actually China still might not be one of the big winners from a geopolitical perspective, because there's such suspicion of China, and because countries, manufacturers are trying to get out of their dependence. I think Dr. Lim mentioned this, that Korean manufacturers are trying to be less dependent on China for manufacturing, and they diversify away. And I think that also China is trying to diversify away from being the part of the low value in the chain. So if we're talking about geopolitical, I said that. If we're talking about economic implications, oh, and David mentioned the Peterson Institute, and how much that's going to add. They did some, if anybody wants to look it up, there's big studies to Japan. I think they said Japan and South Korea stand to gain the most from RCEP in terms of economics. Let me think what else I wanted to talk about. In terms of legal, and here again, I had talked to Adas about this when it first came in, was first signed, and I was trying to think about how much China had, what kind of impact China had on the provisions and the legal implications of China in the negotiations. And I'm not sure, and I think that some of you reinforced this, like I think David said something about how Australia brought in some of the topics at the very end. Most of the stuff was, most of the weakness, like the lack of a provision on SOEs, the lack of provisions on labor, environment, that's all ASEAN as well as China. So I'm not sure how much China impacted that as much as ASEAN impacted that. Then another legal thing about future rules. What I've heard, somebody made a very interesting point recently that I was listening to about there are no rules presently on things like 3D manufacturing. And there are no rules, 3D printing and 3D and artificial intelligence. And it may be that this common group, this RCEP group, will be able to set the standards for what's going to be in the future, what kind of provisions, international trade provisions or legal trade provisions will comply on those things. Because the person that I heard talk about it said something about the Secretariat being very active in that kind of an idea. The fact that there's a Secretariat in this RCEP arrangement, and that the Secretariat, there's going to be regular meetings at all different levels. Okay, so now that's what I wanted to say briefly, but a few questions. I was surprised when David and Dr. Lim from Korea both mentioned, when they said, why now signing? Why didn't you mention the CPTPP being signed? Didn't that have any impact? That was my first question. And the follow-up question to that is, what impact will RCEP have on what's going on in the United States-US trade policy? Then, anybody have any ideas of the chances of India rejoining? Oh, I didn't mention that the three big losers, I think, are the United States, the EU, and India. I think India stands to lose a lot from having withdrawn from the agreement. And again, Indonesia, the person who spoke about Indonesia and Thailand, neither of you mentioned the whole idea of the regional value chain and the possibility of these new rules of origin, allowing your two countries' companies to become part of that chain, a more important part of those chains, especially at a time that China is moving out of low value inputs. Okay, so I'll let whoever else wants to answer, or whoever else wants to ask some questions. Those are just a few. Thank you.
Let me answer your questions first. Okay.
Okay.
I have 5 points to address here. First is, who is the winner of this deal? I would say that, okay, look, in 2002, we used to have the Prime Minister Thaksin. When he talks about China, ASEAN and China, he said, okay, you look, Thailand has 70 million population, China has 1.2 billion. So I mean, you can sell to the market with 1.2 billion, and they can sell to 70 billion, you would win. At the times we talk about who would win the deal on the trade deal. In fact, many years later, it's revealed that no, Thailand could not overcome China, because even though your market is smaller than them 20 times, but you have to take into account 3 things. First, ability to produce. I mean, you have facility to produce with the cheap price like China or not. Second, ability to market. Okay, you have very good products, but you cannot penetrate into Chinese market, very perplexing markets. Third, and what to sell. Okay, if Thailand still sell these products with the same technology as China, you cannot sell in their own land. Okay, it seems that between Thailand and China, for two parties, we lost the trade war, but in fact, no, because you lose in the trade in goods, but we have 5 million, 6 million, 10 million, and 12 million recently Chinese tourists to Thailand, and they spend almost to reach the equilibrium of economic that you deficit in the trade in goods. So I would say that all members to this RCEP, they lost something and they gained something. No one alone lost everything. They lost and gained something, because this is the deal of negotiations. You trade off something with another thing. You might have less benefit and value for one part, but you get another part. But in overall, when your market is bigger, like your house is bigger, every member would join the benefit. I still hope this. Okay, this is the first question. The second question is the flexibility of rules. In my view, mean no rules. Okay, it means something that you agree is the flexible time frame or the flexible framework. It means you have to work out what it would look like in future, because you cannot look it or you cannot see it concretely right now. So it means no rules. And many part of RCEP, like other treaty, they agree for one thing very concretely, that the custom duty would be reduced for this percentage, but for many things, it is very flexible, like no rules. So if you read the whole RCEP, you would see that they talk about trade in goods and trade in services, nothing else. Okay, ASEAN and trade in goods and trade in services. Okay, I will come back.
No. I know that Marsha is very tough. She asks difficult questions, and she won't. It demands at least 2 hours to respond to everyone. So
okay.
Try to respond.
I stop here.
In 1 minute, please. Marsha, next time only short questions. sorry for virtual. So, David, do you want to respond? Lem, do you want to respond?
Okay,
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Oh, can I?
sorry,
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Lem, Professor Lim. Yeah, Professor Lim. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be quick. So let me talk about the winner thing first. So I would say geopolitically, China would be the winner in here. Because of that, actually, for South Korea, CPTPP would be the matter. So actually, right after signing the RCEP, the President Office of South Korea firstly faced the question, like, what if United States requests Korea's participation in the CPTPP? And then the President Office official said that RCEP and CPTPP were not confrontational but complementary, but now is not the time to decide. The reason why I talked about CPTPP is South Korea was not a founding member of CPTPP and then was kind of hesitant to sign in. But after signing this so-called China-centric multilateral agreements, South Korea will not be easy to resist the United States pressure to sign CPTPP, regardless of its decision. That is why this will be the strongest challenges for South Korea. So in this term, the reason why I thought that China was the winner in here, it is considered China-centric agreement, even though ASEAN was the one who initiated this discussion. And because of that, as I said, CPTPP would be the matter for South Korea. And even though in the long term, we all expect kind of economic gains for every member countries, in the short term, I would say China would gain a lot.
Thank you. David?
Look, I just want to say, I think it's been an excellent discussion. I don't expect the United States to take initiative anytime soon to join either CTPP or any other trade agreement. I think that's going to be low on the priorities of a president who is dependent upon turning around the manufacturing states in the northeast of the US and the Midwest of the US in order to gain power. I think there was a good comment made earlier that that RCEP is a victory for globalization. Globalization had been under huge threat as a result of the Trump administration. I think globalization is still under threat, as Professor Lin's slide looking at the decline of regional value chains shows. But I think that the fact that these countries are able to join, so many countries are able to join and sign a trade agreement after so many years of disappointment at the WTO and amid such a difficult trade time is something that should be a source of encouragement for everyone, regardless of how large or small are the individual gains.
Oh, David, optimistic view. We love it.
Last comment, maybe from June. Just a quick response before we complete this session.
Wrap it up.
June, please.
To respond to the question on who's the biggest winner, yeah, we can tell that right now we're having NAFTA, and the EU also has their free trade agreement. What I want to mention is without RCEP, we are all losers. It's not who's the biggest, who's the winner. I mean, if there's no RCEP, other regions has already their own regional agreement, and they are intensifying their regional abilities. I mean, the Asia and Asia Pacific area is the most prosperous area. Why shouldn't we make it more step forward, make it more progress, and make the cake bigger? And I think that's the winner. Without this, we're all losers. That's what I want to mention. Thanks.
I want to short comment.
Yes, go.
Okay.
Make it short, yeah.
I think I agree with Professor Lim. China has more winning in the RCEP because China is in RCEP is the biggest economic country in this member, but China has a problem in the geopolitical policy. In the other hand, China is attractive country and in the diplomatic economic in Southeast Asia. But in other hand, China has a problem with their neighborhood in Southeast Asia, like South China Sea, and then with Korea, and then etc. I think it's ambivalency foreign policy for China to winning the RCEP geopolitical in the geopolitical aspect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been an amazing discussion. We need to have an additional few more webinars just to answer Marsha's difficult questions. We won't agree on on most of our questions, but we can. We would love to disagree, and thanks to Zoom webinar, we can meet in the morning.
Maybe last sentence. Maybe the last sentence for Professor Kuchiki, if you want to conclude with your conclusions from your experience and research. You're muted.
Unmute.
Oh. Thank you very much for my chance, maybe last chance. And you know, TPP and TPP is the next I said, and in Japan, my opinion is very minor. And Japan's political side is on United States, right? And but I'm insisting that the weight should be changed from US to China because, as I said, the share of GDP will change. And maybe, you know, the location of Japan is very close to China. So as Pyro or maybe Lim said, I think, you know, the benefit of Chinese economy is very huge to neighboring countries. And so, but I'm not saying that, you know, Japan should own Chinese side, but the role of Japan is to unite global economy. It's my opinion. And I hope, you know, globe is getting narrow and narrower. As we can discuss by this webinar, all over the world, you know, we can discuss very easily. And the world is changing, and we need one global government is necessary to control and regulate. In that sense, I'm very happy that President Trump will retire. That's my last message. Thank you.
Well, Joe Biden has a difficult job to, some would say, to repair or to make America great again and again and again. But it's going to be an interesting time. We want to thank you all for participating. It was an amazing discussion, amazing talks. We might consider to publish it if you would like to join Write Papers. We invite you for our next webinar. We want to meet most of the 15 members and then to have another discussion with the big elephant to talk about the United States and other members that didn't join the RCEP. So have a wonderful weekend, a wonderful evening, morning, and toda. Thank you for participating.
Toda raba. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
고맙습니다. 교수님. Peace.